The Gale of the Red Mist is a dangerous place, and weapons are key to an anime vampire's survival, as the old saying goes. Welcome to a comprehensive weapon guide for Code Vein. I'll be splitting this up into multiple parts based on weapon class. In this video, we will cover one-handed swords. It will include where to find these weapons, my opinions on their general usefulness, and the damage they deal for a character at level 1, level 50, level 100, level 200, and the max level of 300. For the sake of accurate comparison, I'll be using the Queenslayer blood code with the willpower up, strength plus willpower up, mind plus willpower up, and the mind up passives. This will give us an A rating in every stat that is relevant to weapons, and thus allow us to wield every single weapon in the game with the same build. I would not recommend using this build for exploring, since you can only equip 2 weapons at a time, and it misses out on a few really useful passives and active buffs. It's better to have a setup that leans into your chosen weapon's strengths and your own personal playstyle. I'll be throwing around some terms as I describe the weapons and their moves, so let's make sure there isn't any confusion. The weak attack is just that, a quicker, low damage, low stamina cost attack. The weak attack chain is simply the series of attacks that happen when you repeatedly press the weak attack button. Sometimes it's just 2 swings, sometimes it's 3 swings, and sometimes it's 4 swings. Then the animations loop around back to the first swing. The sprinting attack is a weak attack you use while sprinting. Shocking, I know. I usually won't go out of my way to say anything about the sprinting attacks unless it's something special. Same for the rolling attacks. The animation changes depending on whether you dodge forwards, backwards, or to the sides, but they don't really fit into the weak attack chain, or they just act as a substitute for the first swing. A combo weak attack is a unique move each weapon has that you can do by holding the dash button and pressing weak attack while not moving your character. It's usually a lunging attack that covers a lot of ground, an attack that knocks enemies down, a wide sweeping attack, or a combination of these. The uncharged heavy attack is what you get when you tap the heavy attack button. The fully charged heavy is when you hold the heavy attack button for a few seconds. There is no partial charge mechanic in Code Vein. If you let go of the heavy attack button too soon, you will just perform an uncharged heavy attack. Feel free to practice the different moves to your heart's content on the training dummy back at home base. Speaking of the training dummy at home base, I'll be performing all of the damage tests on it. This is worth mentioning because the dummy has neither any elemental resistances nor elemental weaknesses. Some weapons have innate elemental damage and will be more effective against some enemies and weaker against others. I'll mention this again when we get to the individual weapons with built-in elemental damage. Lastly, all of the weapons were tested without any transformations, since this can change the damage dramatically based on your level, what passives you have equipped, and what you're fighting. You can think of the damage numbers I provide as a rough estimate for a generic character, rather than the highest possible damage you can achieve with the right preparations. Okay, now that the preliminary stuff has been cleared up, let's jump right in. The one-handed swords. They have low stamina consumption per swing and are generally very quick, but they also have modest damage and low stagger. They make an excellent weapon for a mage or as a debuff delivery system. They mesh well with a hit-and-run playstyle. Rush in, get a couple of quick swipes, back off, and repeat until your opponent dies. The drain rating is pretty lackluster without the Devour transformation or drain boosting passives and gifts, but this doesn't stop them from being a superb weapon class. For the most part, at least. One-handed swords can be divided into 3 main groups according to their attack speed: fast, slow, and katana style. I'll go more into details as it becomes relevant. The Queenslayer one-handed sword. This is one of the first usable one-handed swords you acquire in your travels. It has an average weight and a quick moveset. You can find it from a chest in the Ruined City Underground tutorial area just after the 3rd checkpoint. The weak attack chain is 4 quick swipes, while the combo weak attack is a thrust capable of knocking down enemies. The uncharged heavy is a quick horizontal strike, while the fully charged heavy is a lunging double slash that covers a lot of ground. It's decent enough for the beginning of the game, but don't get too attached to it. You'll find many superior swords as you make your way through the game. The pipe. Both the first weapon of the game and the absolute lightest one-handed sword, the pipe is an odd weapon. Honestly, it's barely a weapon at all thanks to its very low damage and very low drain rating, but then again, what can you really expect from the default starting weapon? It has the same exact moveset as the Queenslayer one-handed sword. In other words, a good moveset. Back on release day, you were restricted to 1 and only 1 pipe, but now on the current patch, you can buy as many as you like. Truthfully, you only really need the one transformed to Devour for blasting the DLC bosses to death with spells in order to obtain the other special pipes. We'll talk more about those later. The pipe is actually not the worst weapon in the game. In fact, a pipe-only self-imposed challenge is pretty fun. You can definitely get up to some shenanigans with a pipe close to the end of the game, thanks to some really powerful gifts. The Broadsword. Here we have our first slow one-handed sword. You can find a pre-upgraded broadsword in a chest in the dried-up trenches on an optional side path next to a big elephant nose guy. It's hard to describe exactly how to get there with just words, so follow this route from the first checkpoint to claim your prize. There's also an alleviated version hiding in the Cliffs of Rust depths, but it isn't upgraded beyond being transformed. The damage is a bit higher than the previous entries so far, but the slower attack speed makes itself a nuisance. The weight is also a bit higher too, which just makes it a more inconvenient weapon. In addition to all this, it consumes more stamina to swing. Quick attack speed and low stamina consumption are the two main strengths of the one-handed swords as a class, but the broadsword lacks those to some degree. The weak attack chain is 2 slow swings, while the combo weak attack is the same thrust as the Queenslayer one-handed sword and pipe, but slower. The uncharged heavy is a slow, deliberate horizontal chop with both hands, while the fully charged heavy is a backhanded spin slash. I haven't talked about sprinting or rolling attacks yet because they're mostly unremarkable single swings. However, the sprinting and forward rolling attack is the fastest move the broadsword, and all the other slow one-handed swords, have in their arsenal. It's wildly inefficient to sprint every time you want to use the quickest attack. This problem isn't unique to slow one-handed swords, but it's just an extra layer of caution you need to keep in mind that can be avoided by using something else. In case it isn't clear, I'm not a fan of this sword, especially since there is a better one in dried up trenches if you dedicate some time to farming it out, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The Hanemukuro, the first of the 3 katana-style swords. This particular subcategory of one-handed swords is a blend of quick and slow swords, featuring slightly better damage than your average quick sword, but with the somewhat slower swings and increased weight. You can find a pre-upgraded Hanemukuro in the Howling Pit in between the second and third checkpoints. You know that maze of narrow walkways bordered by bottomless pits? Yeah, there's a chest guarded by a fat guy close to the end of that part of Howling Pit. There's also a +0 version that's been transformed to lightning in the Flood of Impurity depths. However, transforming it back to only physical damage will cost you 2,500 haze, so you might as well just use the +3 one from the Howling Pit. The Hanemukuro is actually a pretty decent early to mid-game weapon. It features a 4-hit combo on the weak attack chain, where the 4th swing comes out really slow. The combo weak attack is a spinning double slash that covers a lot of distance. The uncharged heavy is a triple slash that glues you in place, while the fully charged heavy is a single hardy diagonal slash. The biggest problem with the Hanemukuro is it doesn't really have a way to knock enemies around. The damage certainly makes up for it, but at lower levels, being able to send baddies off cliffs or hammering them prone to get some free hits in is invaluable. The Enduring Crimson. Next, we have the first NPC weapon, Lewis's Sword. The only way to get it is by exchanging valuables with Lewis until you have 50, friendship points. Same moveset and strengths as the Hanemukuro, but with higher damage and higher stat requirements. And redder. Much, much redder. Still can't knock enemies down, though. The Machete. Next is the polar opposite of the Hanemukuro in Enduring Crimson. The Machete is heavy, slow, and can send an enemy sprawling with ease. You can find a pre-upgraded version in the Ridge of Frozen Souls in the ice tunnel near the final checkpoint. There's a Cerberus Knight with a map marker missile glued to him, guarding the chest containing the machete. There's also a +0 machete transformed to stun located in the Silent White depths. Again, it's more cost-effective just to use the one from the story area, especially since status debuff transformations work best on fast weapons, and the machete definitely isn't fast. The weak attack chain is 2 alternating diagonal swipes. The combo weak attack is a leaping downward slam. If you stagger an enemy with this attack, you will actually pancake them into the pavement. Very handy. The uncharged heavy is a single horizontal chop, while the fully charged heavy is a brutal spinning slash that will send enemies flying if that attack is the one that staggers them. Remember how I went on for 45 minutes about sprinting attacks with slow one-handed swords? Yep, same thing applies to the machete. The sprinting and forward-rolling attacks are the fastest attacks. All in all, the machete is interesting with its ability to shove enemies around, but it is definitely not the best one-handed sword for every situation. The Argent Wolf One-Handed Sword. The Argent Wolf One-Handed Sword is my favorite of all one-handed swords, so I might be slightly biased with this commentary. It does solid damage, has a quick moveset, has pretty manageable stat requirements, and reasonable weight. This sword has it all. However, acquiring one can be a bit of a hassle. It only drops from one-handed sword-wielding Cerberus knights, the first of which can be found in the dried-up trenches. It is a somewhat rare drop, so you might need to kill the knight a few times to get it. Follow this route from the second checkpoint, slay the Cerberus knight, and use either a Vivifier or run back and rest at the checkpoint again to respawn him. Since the fully charged heavy attack has a projectile, I'll be recording the damage from the initial swing and the projectile separately. Fun fact, the melee damage is based off of your strength and dexterity, while the projectile is based off of your mind and willpower. You can actually get the projectile to hit twice if the enemy is large enough and your spacing is spot on. In other words, if you get lucky. The weak attack chain is a quick 4-hit combo. The combo weak attack is a thrust that can send enemies flying backwards. The uncharged heavy is a lunging double slash, while the fully charged heavy is an upward slash with a short-range projectile. I love this sword so much. It's perfect for casters and hybrid builds at any level. It's my main weapon of choice when I'm fighting the DLC bosses outside of challenges. The Blazing Claw. Here we have another katana-style sword, but spicy. The Blazing Claw is lauded for having incredible DPS, but has one significant weakness. It has built-in fire damage. This might seem like no big deal on paper, but in practice, fire is the second most commonly resisted element, with blood being the most common if you're curious. Unless the enemy is specifically weak to fire, you will wind up doing less damage than the Enduring Crimson or Hanemukuro. What about piling on all the fire damage with a fire transformation, fire buff, and fire cartridge? It's a bit better, yes, but you're better off just using Bridge to Glory on an Enduring Crimson and saving the haze spin on transforming and buying cartridges. The moveset is identical to the other katana-style swords, except for the heavy attacks. The weak attack chain is a 4-hit combo, where the fourth swing comes out really slow. The combo weak attack is a spinning double slash that covers a lot of distance. The uncharged heavy, however, is a horizontal slash with a gout of flame with kind of a weird hitbox. If you're too close, you will hit with the slash, but the flame will often miss. If you're too far, you'll miss with the slash and do pretty minor damage with the flame. There is a perfect distance where both connect, but it is a very narrow margin. The fully charged heavy is a downward stab, followed by an explosion! It's good against enemies trying to stand up, but otherwise impractical thanks to its long charge. It's worth noting that none of these moves will knock an enemy down. My opinion is that at best this weapon is niche, and at worst it's dreadfully overrated. The limited use, high dexterity and willpower requirements, and somewhat annoying moveset make it not very desirable in my eyes. The Iceblood. How about another boss weapon with built-in elemental damage? The Iceblood has the same big problem that the Blazing Claw has, but ice instead of fire. True, ice is one of the more useful elements, but the physical damage of Iceblood is very low. It kinda shoots itself in the foot, which is a shame, because it is incredibly lightweight and has a quick moveset. You can earn the Iceblood by defeating Blade Bearer and Cannoneer. The attacks are very similar to the Argent Wolf one-handed sword, with some ice-flavored flourishes on the heavy attacks. The weak attack chain is 4 quick swings. The combo weak attack is a thrust that can knock enemies down. The uncharged heavy is a horizontal slash that kicks up a wave of ice, and is a little more reliable than the uncharged heavy on the Blazing Claw. Oh, by the way, the damage numbers listed here are for the slash itself and the final amount of damage if all the ice spikes hit. The fully charged heavy is a single thrust with an icy extension that doesn't actually knock enemies down. I do like the Iceblood, but I can't seriously recommend it because of its flaws. On top of the previously mentioned split damage, it has quite a high dexterity and mind requirement for not very much return. The Sunset Sword. Here's an unconventional choice of weapon. It's a Queenslayer one-handed sword, but corrupted by miasma. The stat requirements are absurdly low. Seriously, the pipe has more demanding stats than this thing. The damage is nothing to write home about, but that's perfectly fine. The Sunset Sword is most useful as a debuff machine. Every build can use a Sunset Sword and Circulating Pulse. Combine those with a debuff transformation of your choice plus the complementary debuff spell and you're golden. What's better still is how common the weapon is. They only drop from small one-handed sword-wielding Lost with tattered scarves, but you'll likely end up with 3 or 4 of these swords in a single playthrough without even trying. The weak attack chain is 4 quick slashes, just like the Queenslayer one-handed sword, but the combo weak attack is a leaping downward slam like the Machetes. That's about where the excitement ends, however, as the Sunset Sword's leaping attack can't pancake enemies. The uncharged and fully charged heavy attacks are identical to the Queenslayer one-handed swords, a quick horizontal slash and a lunging double slash respectively. The biggest weakness of the Sunset Sword is that it lacks a way to knock enemies down. However, if you're trying to do anything besides inflict a status debuff with this sword, you're using it wrong. Proc poison, stun, or whatever, and switch to a weapon that can knock enemies down or deal more damage. On the whole, I feel the Sunset Sword is criminally overlooked. The Black Saber. Let's move on to a somewhat rare weapon. The Black Saber is a slow one-handed sword that is obtainable from the hunters in black wielding it, although the drop chance is absurdly low. You can get it as early as the Cathedral by farming the guy near the Outlook Tower checkpoint. The weak attack chain is your standard slow vertical then horizontal slashes. The combo weak attack is the same leaping slam that's found on the Machete, but it doesn't flatten enemies. The uncharged heavy attack is a spinning double slash, while the fully charged heavy is a vertical slash with a projectile. The heavy attacks of the Black Saber are exactly the same as Argent with one-handed sword, so the damage numbers will be listed the same way. You might have noticed that the projectile damage is the same at every level. That's because there's no scaling bonus for mind or willpower, and therefore no bonus damage based on level. Just like with the Machete, the fastest attack is the sprinting attack or forward rolling attack. It also lacks a way to throw enemies around. Even though it does solid damage, I really can't recommend this sword because it is so slow and heavy. The Executioner. Next up is Jack's signature weapon, the Executioner. In order to get it, you will need to exchange valuables with him to get 50 friendship points, at which point you can trade for the sword. Although it looks very similar to the Black Saber, it is actually a quick weapon. The weak attack chain is 4 quick slashes like the Queenslayer one-handed sword, but the rest of the attacks are identical to the Black Saber. The combo weak attack is a leaping slam that can't pancake enemies, the uncharged heavy is a spinning double slash, while the fully charged heavy is the projectile vertical slash. Once again, the damage numbers for the heavy attacks will be listed just like the Argent Wolf one-handed sword and Black Saber. As you can see from the damage numbers, the Executioner starts putting out some big damage once you level up high enough, especially if you pick passives that lean into the high dexterity scaling. Honestly, I haven't really used it much since it can't knock enemies down, and it takes a lot of farming to acquire this sword. However, these two factors aren't necessarily a deal breaker. The Lost Broadsword. The Lost Broadsword is basic, slow, and somewhat beefy. It is also remarkably common. You could potentially pick it up in the very first area of the game if you're lucky. The damage is a tad on the higher side, as is the case with most of the slow weapons of this class. The moveset is identical to the standard broadsword, which makes sense because the Lost version is the same weapon but twisted and corrupted by the Queen's miasma. The weak attack chain is 2 chops, a vertical one followed by a horizontal one. The combo weak attack is a thrust capable of sending foes flying. The uncharged heavy attack is a horizontal slash with both hands, while the fully charged heavy is a spinning backslash. Once again, the sprinting attack and forward rolling attack are your fastest moves. Overall, the Lost Broadsword isn't ideal. It will certainly work in a pinch thanks to its high base damage when you're low level, but it very quickly gets outclassed by other one-handed swords. Because it's so slow, I can't even recommend it as a debuff vehicle like the Sunset Sword. The Elemental Pipes. First up out of the DLC weapons are the ones that are the hardest to acquire. Go figure. You must defeat each of the main DLC bosses without taking damage or dying, without healing or using any items, and using only the standard pipe as your weapon. I recommend using a pure caster build to get these pipes, but that's a topic for a different video. I'm going to group all of these together because they're virtually the same but with different elements. The moveset is exactly the same as the normal pipe, so just skip back to that one if you want to hear the details again. Honestly, you have no reason to use these other than to show off. The elemental bonus is still going to be garbage if you use these on an enemy weak to their respective elements. After collecting the 3 elemental pipes, go talk to Rin the weaponsmith to buy the Pipe of the Unrivaled. It is exactly the same as the standard pipe, but utterly pimp-tastic. Its only purpose is to let other players know you've completed the hardest challenge the game could throw at you. The Inferno Blade. Have you ever picked up a Sunset Sword and thought to yourself, man, I wish this thing was on fire? If you have the Hellfire Knight DLC, all your dreams will come true then. The Inferno Blade is given to you if you slay the Hellfire Knight without dying more than 3 times while using any one-handed sword. The moveset is identical to the Sunset Sword with one notable exception. The fully charged heavy will imbue your sword with extra fire damage. The buff actually stays active if you switch weapons, and stacks with any other weapon buffs and items. The sword is interesting in another way too. It's mainly strength-oriented in terms of stat requirements and scaling. If you needed a quick weapon for your tanky strength build, now you have one. This weapon is fairly interesting thanks to the fire buff. It is slightly better than a quick normal sword that's been transformed to fire, but the stat requirements are pretty demanding. In essence, the Inferno Blade is a nice, but niche sword. The Fulmen Blade. Have you ever picked up a lost broadsword and thought to yourself, man, I wish this thing was high voltage? If you have the Lord of Thunder DLC, all of your... Wait, I just had a severe case of deja vu. Anyways, you get the Fulmen Blade by defeating Lord of Thunder with 3 revives or fewer while using any one-handed sword. This thing has the exact same moveset as the Lost Broadsword, but the fully charged heavy will shroud the weapon in electricity. Just like with the Inferno Blade, the lightning buff sticks around after you switch weapons, and it stacks with any other elemental buffs and items. The stat requirements are really demanding, needing a ton of dexterity and a healthy amount of mind as well. The description is also a lie. It only scales off of dexterity. Honestly, the slow moveset and high requirements kind of spoil the weapon. Generally speaking, lightning is better than fire on the list of elements, but it isn't enough to save it from being mediocre. I want to like this sword, but there are much better options. The Crimson Longsword. Our last sword is part of the God Eater collaboration set. You will need to spend real-world money to add this to your game. Once you install the DLC, talk to Rin at home base to buy the Crimson Longsword for a ridiculously small amount of haze. This weapon is one of the quick swords, with pretty reasonable weight and stat requirements. Its moveset is very similar to the Queenslayer one-handed sword. The weak attack chain is the familiar old 4 quick swipes. The combo weak attack, however, is a lot like the 4th swing of the katana-style sword's combo, but it has a projectile. I often forget this sword doesn't have a thrust and get bopped in the face because this move is so slow. The uncharged heavy attack is a horizontal slash, while the fully charged heavy is a lunging double slash. The biggest downside to this weapon is the lack of a knockdown move. Its damage isn't all that special, but it gets the job done. This weapon also makes a good candidate for a debuff transformation. And that's it! All of the one-handed swords in Code Vein. If you can overcome their weak stagger and low drain, they can be very powerful indeed. Thanks for watching this all the way through. You're a champ for making it this far. Tune in next time for more Code Vein guides. See ya!